Hello there everyone, how you doing today? Today I figured I'd try to get back into creepypasta narrations by reading Great Grandfather's Deal on Reddit. Link to the original story will be in the description below. If you enjoy, please like and subscribe. Maybe check me out at the following websites under the following names over here. Now, let's get started, shall we?
Julius Productions. Sit down, get comfy, and await your horror.
When my parents told me I was being sent to take care of my great-grandfather, I was very hesitant. My great-grandfather, Hyman Franjur, celebrated his 110th birthday in December. Not that anyone has been invited to his party. Actually, there had been no party because my great-grandfather was a shut-in. He was a famous horror writer, writing and publishing stories since the turn of the century, and he was supposed to have a small fortune. As such, he lived in a Mary Shelley-style house out in the middle of nowhere, toiling away at his latest work of terror. My mother had 5 sisters, and all of them had been trying to get a highly coveted spot in Great-Grandpa's will, but so far, none of my cousins had managed it. It wasn't like I wanted any of his money, but Mom was insistent. She had been after Great-Granddad's money, just like her sisters, since her early adulthood, and now it seemed that her time has finally come around. This seemed to be her chance, since all my other cousins had struck out. She told me to spend the summer and fall with him, and see how things worked out. And bring some of your writings with you. Maybe that'll get you in good with the old man. So that was how I came to be on my great-grandfather's porch in mid-May, prepared to stay until nearly Halloween. The house was an old 3-story that I knew was nearly a mansion from the few times I'd been in it as a kid. There were 8 rooms, 5 bathrooms, a kitchen study, and of course, my grandfather's office on the 3rd floor. Sometimes you could see him through the large bay window up there, hard at work on his old typewriter. He had once sat close to the window, so that he could look out and perhaps be inspired by the forests and lawns that surrounded his property. Now it appeared he had preferred a spot farther away from all those distractions. I rang the doorbell and was unsurprised to hear the lock click open electronically. Great-grandpa kept no staff. Before I had been born, a few of his caretakers had turned up missing. After several searches of the home and property, Great-grandpa had finally just dismissed his staff and lived alone. He had mostly relied on the kindness of his relatives, or just done without. For most of my life, he was a very reclusive old man, and I wasn't really looking forward to spending the next 6 months in his company. I had been preparing a manuscript to send off for publication, and I figured that I would have little time for revisions if I was too busy tending to my aging grandchild and his monstrous home. Looking back on it now, I see that I really had no idea what was in store for me. The house had a musty look to it. It looked like some gothic construction from one of my great-grandfather's novels. I don't know if this was intentional, and it gave the place a very uncared-for look about it. I had to wonder what my cousins Leslie had actually done here when he stayed for 8 months last year. The floors were dusty, the drapes in the kitchen were growing a fine crop of mold from a leaky window, and the whole place had a very dank smell to it. Given the house's age, this was no surprise. The house was well over 100 years old, and had been both my great-grandfather and my grandfather's ancestral home. Now it was a little more than a hulking relic that sat waiting for my great-grandfather to die so some construction company could turn it into a strip mall. A speaker crackled in the foyer, and the buzzing sound made me jump a foot off the ground. "Don't just stand around counting the silver. Come up to my study. I have orders for you." Even at 110, it sounded as though he hadn't lost the steel from his voice. So I climbed up 3 flights of stairs, wondering how my great-grandfather made it up and down this steep old staircase. He must come down to eat, I reflected. He hadn't had anyone to help him, since Leslie had left some 6 months ago, as my young, sturdy legs made up the climb up the creaky old boards. I reflected that I was nearly winded as I came to the second-floor landing. I would soon become quite intimate with those steps in the months to come. My grandfather sat in the top room. The room had once been an attic, but great-grandpa had converted it into an office just before my own grandfather had been born. The second set of stairs had been built just for him, and they were steeper than the original set by far. As I came up the stairs, I could see my grandfather's desk and the battered old wingback of the chair he had owned since I was a child. The desk and the chair sat in profile, and it was like a scene from a movie. The camera would start a slow path as it mounted the stairs, and the audience would see the back of the red upholstered chair and hear the clicking of keys. He sat hunched there like a gargoyle, arthritic fingers tapping away at the keys of his battered old typewriter. The sound was skeletal somehow, like bones against ivory. He kept right on clocking away as I stood a respectful distance behind his chair, not wanting to get off on the wrong foot with this ancient writer that I must share quarters with for the next few months. The attic room was the size of a normal studio apartment and appeared almost Spartan at its furnishing. There was a bed, small and neat-looking, several sagging old bookcases that looked equally as infected with mold, and a rug that stretched from the landing up to the dark mahogany desk, which sat ever facing into the corner. It had once faced the picturesque window that looked over his property. Now, however, it looked only into the corner, as though someone had put my ancient great-grandshire in timeout. "I understand you want to be my new caretaker." I jumped a little, the clicking leading me to believe that he would go on ignoring me for a while longer. His voice was creaky, raspy from the lack of use. I expected to see dust piff off from behind the chair. And when he turned, I decided that my expectations hadn't been far off. To call my great-grandfather ancient would have missed the mark. The man was shrunken to the point of elfishness. He could not have been more than 4 feet tall, and his arms and legs looked shriveled and childlike. His arms he held in front of him, hands held down at the wrist in a way that made me wonder how much it must hurt him to write on. His legs hung within an inch above the floor as he sat in the monstrous chair, and I remember thinking he looked like a child sitting in his father's seat. The image was more grotesque than humorous. You should know that I have high expectations of my helpers, and I give no special treatment for family members. Your life here will be hard, but focus on the silver lining. You might just manage to acquire that so coveted spot in my will that my children, my children's children, and now my children's children's children seem so incapable of garnering. Anything is possible, I suppose. And when he shrugged his shoulders, I imagined I could hear them grind together. Listening to him talk was like watching an exceptionally talented bit of ventriloquism. His accent was plummy, cultured, and far too deep for the child-sized creature residing on his throne. I expected someone to poke their head out from the back of the chair any minute now and laugh, saying how they had got me. When we both ended up staring at each other for the next few seconds, and no grand revelation was revealed, he went on. He told me about his meal schedule first. He ate breakfast at 5, lunch at 11, and dinner at 6. He subsided almost entirely on Campbell's soup, of which he had an ample supply of in the pantry. There were 7 different flavors of soup, one for each day of the week, and every month there was a number I would have to call for more delivered. He told me I could make a list of foods I wanted, and they would be delivered to the house with the order. Just keep the bill under $500 a month, he droned. I would like to remain in funds until I die. He bathed every night at 7. While he assured me he didn't need help bathing, he would need help getting into the bathroom and into the tub, out of the tub and back to his room. I was to put him in the tub and leave until summoned again. He would be fully dressed again when I arrived to help him back to his room. His schedule, other than that, was writing. He sometimes wrote for 18 or 19 hours a day, and would often write well into the night if the mood took him. He rarely slept, he told me, and I would likely find him napping in his chair if I needed something early in the morning. He slept, most often, between 2 and 5 a.m. I was not to disturb him or make any noise between those hours whatsoever. When you're my age, you find you don't need as much sleep as normal people. But I won't have the little I do need disturbed by your needless clatter. My duties, other than feeding and bath time, were my own. I would like the house swept once a week, the windows opened once a week, to add the dust, and the drapes taken down and washed once a month. I have a sneaking suspicion that feckless cousin of yours didn't accomplish any of these things, so it's likely to be a mess down there. I do not own a TV, nor do I have internet. There is a phone in the kitchen that you may use, if you should need to, and while I do have electricity, I expect you to turn the lights off behind yourself. I seem to recall that your cousin Winfred racked up a $400 power bill while staying here, and I ejected her for it. So long as you follow my rules to keep the house, I suspect I will ignore you for your stay here, and we will have no hardships. He dismissed me after that, and thus began my time in great-grandfather's house, a time I would come in later years to regret undertaking. It first began with the typing. My grandshire hadn't lied. He wrote 18 or 19 hours a day, and the keys of his typewriter were very loud. You could hear him typing away from anywhere in the house, and the noise became a constant background drone. Using my hotspot on my phone, I was able to get some writing done, and my proofreading was coming along. It was slow, the signal out here being poor at best, but I plucked away at it dutifully, despite the distracting sound of all that clacking. The sound almost seemed to scuttle, worming its way into your ears, like phantom fingers as you sat trying to concentrate. I tried playing music and using earbuds, but the sound seemed to clatter against my senses, like a poorly played piano. No matter how high the volume, I became rather sympathetic for a particular Poe character, having my own telltale heart clattering at all hours of the night. I would even take my laptop out into the lawn to get some work done on sunny days, and though it defied all logic, I imagined that the sound of that typewriter could be heard there as well. I sometimes thought I could hear it from the porch to the mailbox down the lane, easily a half-mile from the house. I know it sounds nuts, but I also know what I heard, and it invaded not just my waking hours, but my resting hours too. And that's how the dream started. Sometimes I would dream that I was sitting up in that big old chair, typing away for hours on end, as the words just came sliding up the paper. In my dream, the paper was never ending. It simply rolled on and up the typewriter. The words rose like a tree in the forest before my very eyes. My fingers would clack endlessly on the keys, my young, strong digits becoming withered like my great-grandpa's as I typed my life away. I was always in the front of that big bay window as I worked, watching the fireflies out in the woods as they frolicked. Sometimes, though, I would catch a glimpse of myself in that mirrored glass and jolt awake as my great-grandfather's face looked back at me. Then there was the whispering. The whispering had likely been there from the start, but I didn't pick up on it for several weeks. Great-grandpa did not own a vacuum, so I was stuck sweeping the floors and taking the drapes outside to beat them with a broom. Fortunately for me, carpets were not all the rage in the turn of the century, and great-grandpa had hardwood floors throughout. I was sweeping the second floor when I heard a spidery whisper come from the stairs at the end of the hall. It was nearly unintelligible, the voice, the thinnest whisper, but my grandfather could not match it in his response.
I won't. You can't make me.
A pause, and then,
You don't even know if he could take my place. It doesn't matter. I won't curse him with the same life I've been cursed with. Stop whispering in my ear and let me finish.
Then came the loud crash of keys resumed, and great-grandfather ignored whoever had been whispering to him. I thought about it as I swept, unsure of what to make of it. Who had he been talking to? More importantly, who had he been talking about? I knew he had no phone up there. If he needed something, he always called down the stairs, and the whispering sounded like it was coming from right inside the room as opposed to a phone. I shook it off as the senile ramblings of an old man, and went about my chores, wanting to get them done so I could return to my own work. That was the first time, but it wouldn't be the last I heard these whispers. I began to hear them in more than just Grandpa's study as well. They began as something like the scrabbling of mouse feet, a skittery noise that just scrabbled across my senses sometimes. The longer I listened, the more I heard, and what I heard was frightening. They whispered about far-off places and foreign hellscapes. They whispered about terrible devils and ancient evils, all of which would win in the end despite the hero's best efforts. I heard them sometimes in my sleep, a place I could not escape them, and they often filled my dreams with terrible prophecy. The work was likely a third indication that something was amiss. While great-grandpa's genre had always been horror, I was more interested in fantasy and YA. My current manuscript was a puff piece, something to get my name on an agent's desk or interest a publisher, so I could work on more groundbreaking fantasy. My story was good, warring vampire clans and romance trying to blossom amongst the chaos. But it was nothing new. A bit safer for YA pseudo-fantasy, the kind that had a built-in audience and was pretty safe. The longer I worked on inside Grandpa's house, though, the darker the story began to become. Characters began to die more often, backstories became less teen-friendly, and a shadow I had fallen across what had been a fairly light little book up until that point. A lot of my time seemed to be spent fixing changes I had been made the day before. I was getting frustrated with the shift in tone that I seemed to be trying to place on the story. It was as though someone was also whispering in my ear, telling me to spill blood or inject horror where none was needed. I found my mind wanting to write things that had never interested me before, and that feeling made me uneasy. Then one morning, I woke up to find my great-grandfather reading some of my editions from the other side of the table. I had fallen asleep at the keys, and when I woke up, I saw his spindly arm scrolling it down as he read. It was clear that he didn't like using the computer. He made a face every time he had to touch the keyboard, as if he'd put his hands down on something unpleasant. When he saw me noticing him, he turned the computer back towards me. Then he did something I had never seen him do in all the years I'd known him. He smiled.
"You write well, boy. It's a little fluffy for my taste, but it appears that I'm not your target audience. How long have you been writing it?"
I told him I had been writing my current work for about a year, but I'd been writing in general for most of my life. He nodded, seeming to like the taste of this new information.
"Thought I was the only one, at least since your Uncle Stephen passed."
And then he slid out of the chair, his feet barely making a sound as they touched the floor, and ambled slowly back upstairs. After that, I seemed to notice him hovering around the dining room often, as I made corrections and changes to my manuscript. At first I tried to ignore him, not wanting to make it awkward, but as the weeks tripped on, I'd asked if he'd like to come help me with my revisions. He declined at first, saying he needed to get back to work. Over time, though, he actually came to sit with me, and helped me labor through the 500 pages of tween trash, as he often called it. Every new revision, the darker ones at least, seemed to interest him, and I found myself taking his suggestions more than I rejected him. Then one day, around Halloween, he invited me to his study. He said there was something he needed to show me. He was standing beside a gigantic wingback chair when I arrived. He looked even more like an unearthed child, as he slid a hand over the arm, his head only slightly tall enough to look over the arm he was stroking.
"You've impressed me, son. Your writing's a little rough. But I suppose that all writing looks rough after a century of it. Many people have asked me how I've lived so long, and writing is the secret to that success. The writing, however, is only half of it. The other half is this."
He stroked the chair again as he said it. A look between love and loathing crossed his face. "Your chair?" I asked skeptically.
"Not my chair. This chair was never mine. It was loaned to me on the grounds that I use it for its intended purpose."
"And what purpose is that?" I asked, feeling the hair on the back of my neck prickle.
"Terror,"
he answered. I almost expected thunder to rumble in the background as he said it. "The chair is meant to spread terror?" I said, trying to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Grandpa didn't seem to notice. He just kept looking at the chair in that loathsome, fascinated way he had. The chair seemed to have him under his sway, and he was powerless to cleave from it.
"The chair is a conduit. Its purpose is simple: spread fear and propagate terror. You've heard the whispers by now, I am sure."
I nodded, hearing them scurry across me even now, as I watched my grandfather stroke the old chair that suddenly seemed to be shallowly respirating before my eyes.
"From the second I read the changes to your manuscript, I knew it had gone to your head. It calls to you, just as it called to me. And now it wants to make a deal."
I took a step back towards the stairs. "What are you talking about? A deal? What sort of deal?"
"You can write forever. Write as much as you want. and your work will make you the kind of money that puts normal men to shame. All you must do is sit in this chair and let it work through you. You can do that, can't you?
I wanted to refuse him. This grinning skeleton and his slowly, but now visibly respirating chair. The longer I looked at it, the more I could see the baleful eyes, the fanning nostrils that were almost snake-like, the grinning mouth that sat in the seat. It was looking at me, and as much as I wanted to deny what he was saying, as the ramblings of a crazy old man, I couldn't. The chair's glamour had slipped away, and now I could see the monster that lay beneath. Come sit, he beckoned. Come sit, and let it show you its power. I didn't want to. Sitting on that thing was the last thing I wanted to do. But I found my legs had other ideas. I was moved, as if by magic. My legs that of a puppet on strings. I expressed all of my will, but I was a child resisting the hurricane. Great-grandfather moved aside as I came before his throne, and when my bottom slid into the hoary old thing, I expected the teeth to gobble me up. Instead, I was filled with something unexpected. I was filled with completion, a sense of homecoming. I was complete. I saw myself reach for the typewriter, as I had done in my dreams. The whispers beckoned me to write, compelled me to spill my talent for them, and I obliged. The words rolled from me. They weren't mine, not mine at all, but they oozed from my fingers like blood. My work became the click-clacking of that keyboard. My mind was a chalkboard, fit only to be wiped and filled again and again. I was taken over, possessed, and the demon of inspiration capered through me. There was no endless paper now, but I saw the sheets filled and refilled, made whole only to be exchanged for another. As I looked down at the ivory keys, I felt my sanity reassert itself when I saw the stains of that virgin ivory. They were dark brown, old blood, but it would surely be wetted again. I don't remember passing out, but I remember waking up. I was lying on the bed in great-grandfather's study. He was sitting on the edge of it, looking away, more childlike, as his legs dangled over the edge. It occurred to me how infrequently I saw him away from his keyboard in months. I had been here, and he looked both forlorn and greatly relieved as he watched his withered feet swing. You did quite well. The first 300 pages of a manuscript that will soon grace the New York Times bestseller list, I am certain. At least my agent seems to think so. I never have had much of a head with popular fiction. What? But I realized I didn't know what to ask. It kicks like a mule, don't it, son? I remember the first time I experienced it back in 36. Or was it 26? Who can remember? I was edging towards old age then. Kids out of the house and off on the road. And your great-grandmother just died of sudden pneumonia. I was alone in this mausoleum, sure that had I maybe one book in me, but unsure how to coax it out. The man I bought it from showed up out of nowhere, showed up as if summoned, and said he had just what I was looking for. When he showed me that ghastly hook you see crouched over there, I was highly skeptical. My eyebrows slid up even more when he said that it had already been paid for. He got a dreamy look on his face, as though his mind was casting back through time. He told me all I had to do was write, just write, and the chair would do the rest.
He told me that the chair would take all my writing to heights that no one had ever dared hope for, and all I had to do was shake his hand. When I sat down to begin, the man tipping his hat and grinning like an imp, I never looked back. At first it was thrilling, churning out stories, books, whole series over the course of years. I was detailing my legacy at a breakneck speed. I was like a dragon, looking up to see decades pass by as I sat before my windows.
His dreamy look became melancholy now, his toes flapping bonelessly as his legs rose and fell like lunatic straw jacks.
This is my legacy, boy. This is the inheritance that all my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren have struggled for. The money, the house, the land, none of it matters. My inheritance is that chair, and that typewriter, and a legacy of stunning horror. It is a heavy mantle, and I would understand if you chose not to take it up. But, and I know from experience, if you don't take it up, you will drive yourself crazy, thinking what could have been. You will wonder if the success you have could not have been greater, if the joy you felt could not have been more, and your years upon this earth could not have been better spent.
He looked at me then with such naked hope that I realized what it would mean if I took this burden from him. He would die, but it seemed he was ready to die. His legacy would be mine. The papers would say that talent ran in the family, and it would continue to run until I passed it on or fell to dust. In the end, I can't even say that I did what I did to save my great-grandfather from his continued suffering. In the end, I did it because it was right. If I didn't do it, I would always wonder, what if? He extended his hand to me. The papers are signed and sitting on the desk. The house, the land, it's all yours. Everything. He empathized, and everything that comes with it. I am proud to say, my hand didn't shake as I took his. On the third arm pump, great-grandpa turned to dust. I was left to sit and watch him scatter across the place he loved so much. Then I took my place in the mouth of that beast and began to write. I would continue to do so for a very long time. It's been so long since I watched grandfather dissolve before my eyes. In that time, I have been on the most prolific horror writer of my age. I have built up money like some old dragon sitting on my wealth as I hunker on my hill. Sometimes my relatives come to see me, but sometimes they don't. My own mother refused to speak with me after great-grandfather left everything to me, but I hardly noticed. She died a few years later, or was it a few decades? I didn't attend. Being away from my work for too long makes the whispers less quiet. I travel some, as my grandfather must have in the beginning, but I never stay away for long. The stories must be told, the conduit must be maintained, and I must remain the keeper of this black lighthouse. It takes a toll, though, to be certain. I understand now why great-grandfather slept so little. If it cannot be expelled, the darkness pools inside you, and the vivid nightmares often bring me screaming back into reality. The bags under my eyes have become luggage, and yesterday I glanced up into the picture window and thought I'd seen a ghost. The old man that looked out from it was withered and shrunken, and I thought that it was great-grandfather's ghost that returned to torment me. I see why my great-grandfather moved into the corner after a time. I am not entirely alone, though. My cousins have gone on to have children of their own, and sometimes they send them to me as I was once sent. One of them, a girl named Kathy, is on her way now. I have heard that Kathy is a prolific poet and said to be quite talented. We shall see what the chair makes of her. Who knows? Perhaps I might be allowed to stop too, before long, and bask in the comfortable darkness that awaits me. I hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe, it helps the channel a lot. See you next time.